Nordic love stories. If stories of hope, love, and second chances touch your heart, subscribe to Nordic Love Stories, because today's unforgettable journey begins with a single whisper that changed 3 lives forever. Everyone in Dry Creek stopped what they were doing when the dusty stagecoach rolled into town. The rancher stood silently beside his wagon, expecting the woman he had agreed to marry through letters. He imagined someone dressed in elegant clothes with expensive luggage, but when the coach door opened, a thin young woman stepped down, wearing a faded brown dress covered with careful patches, an old grey shawl around her shoulders, worn leather boots, and carrying only a tiny, weathered suitcase. The crowd burst into quiet laughter, convinced no respectable rancher's bride would arrive, looking so poor. Some whispered that she would never survive life on a ranch. Others claimed Samuel Carter should send her back immediately. The young woman lowered her eyes, trying to ignore every cruel word. Before Samuel could even introduce himself, his 7-year-old daughter Lily ran across the street, wrapped her little arms around the stranger, and whispered with tears in her eyes, "Please don't leave. Will you be our mama?" The entire town fell silent. Clara's eyes filled with tears because no one had ever welcomed her like that before. She gently knelt and hugged the lonely child. Samuel watched the moment without speaking. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier, he had forgotten what hope looked like. Clara slowly stood and looked at Samuel. "If I've disappointed you, I'll understand if you want me to leave," she said softly. Samuel looked at the frightened woman for several seconds before taking her small suitcase. "You've traveled far enough. Come home." During the wagon ride, endless golden fields stretched beneath the evening sun. Lily refused to let go of Clara's hand for even a second. She happily talked about her favorite horse, the small creek behind the barn, and the flowers her mother used to grow beside the porch. Clara listened quietly, smiling through tears she tried to hide. When they finally reached the ranch, Clara noticed broken fences, empty flower beds, and a lonely farmhouse that carried the weight of years without laughter. She did not complain or ask for comfort. Instead, she smiled gently and asked, "May I help tomorrow?" Samuel simply nodded, surprised that she noticed the ranch before noticing herself. Long before sunrise the next morning, Clara quietly lit the old stove, baked fresh bread from the little flour remaining, cleaned every dusty shelf, repaired torn curtains with her sewing kit, and placed wildflowers inside an old glass jar on the kitchen table. When Lily woke up, the familiar house smelled warm for the first time in years. Her laughter echoed through every room. Samuel returned from feeding the horses and stopped in the doorway, amazed by the peaceful feeling filling the home. Later that afternoon, Clara discovered a frightened foal lying injured beside the pasture fence. Without hesitation, she cleaned its wounds, wrapped its injured leg with strips torn from her own shawl, gently stroked its neck, and softly sang until the trembling animal finally rested. Samuel watched from a distance, realizing the poorest woman in town possessed the richest heart he had ever known. As the sun disappeared beyond the western hills, he quietly wondered whether fate had sent him a stranger, or the miracle his broken family had been waiting for. Samuel could not stop thinking about what he had seen the previous evening. Every neighbor had judged Clara by her worn clothes, yet not one of them had noticed the kindness she carried in her, a heart. The next morning, she was awake before everyone else once again. She prepared breakfast, packed food for Samuel to take to the fields, and carefully brushed the little girl's hair before tying it with a simple blue ribbon she had sewn from a piece of old fabric. Lily smiled brighter than she had in years. After breakfast, Clara walked through the ranch, quietly making a list of everything that needed repairing. She fixed loose fence rails, watered the neglected vegetable garden, gathered eggs from the chicken coop, and even cleaned the old stable until it looked almost new. Samuel watched her from across the yard, unable to understand how someone who owned almost nothing could give so much without asking for anything in return. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the prairie and a powerful storm swept across the valley. The frightened horses began running toward a damaged section of the fence. Samuel rushed after them while Clara pulled Lily safely inside the barn. Seeing one frightened colt trapped beneath a fallen wooden gate, Clara ignored the heavy rain and ran straight into the storm. Together, she and Samuel lifted the broken gate just enough for the young horse to escape. Both of them were soaked by the freezing rain, but neither cared as they watched the frightened animal run safely back to the herd. Samuel looked at Clara with new respect. "You could have been hurt," he said quietly. Clara simply smiled. "Sometimes kindness asks us to be brave." That evening they sat around the fireplace. While the storm continued outside, Lily rested her head on Clara's shoulder and slowly fell asleep. Samuel noticed how naturally the little girl trusted her. For the first time since his wife's passing, the lonely farmhouse felt like a real family home again. The following morning, several townspeople arrived at the ranch. They claimed Samuel had made a terrible mistake by bringing home such a poor bride. One woman laughed at Clara's patched dress and whispered that she looked more like a servant than a rancher's future wife. Clara lowered her eyes and remained silent. Before she could answer, Samuel stepped forward. "The value of a person isn't measured by the clothes they wear," he said firmly. "It's measured by the heart they carry." The visitors exchanged embarrassed glances before quietly leaving the ranch. Clara looked at Samuel with grateful eyes, but before she could thank him, he simply smiled and returned to work. Later that afternoon, Lily led Clara to a small hill overlooking the ranch, where colorful wildflowers danced in the warm breeze. "Mama used to come here whenever she wanted to pray," Lily whispered. Clara gently held the little girl's hand as they stood together in silence. She promised herself she would protect this child with all her heart, whether she officially became part of the family or not. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the endless western horizon, Samuel watched them from the porch. Deep inside, he realized something extraordinary was happening. The woman, who had arrived carrying only an old suitcase, had already filled every empty corner of the ranch with hope, and without anyone noticing, she had also begun healing the broken heart of the lonely rancher himself. Several weeks passed, and the ranch slowly became the happiest place in the valley. The broken fences stood strong again. The garden bloomed with colorful flowers. The horses looked healthier, and laughter echoed through the old farmhouse every single day. Clara never asked for expensive clothes, jewelry, or comfort. She believed that a peaceful home was worth more than any treasure. The neighbors who had once laughed at her now quietly admired everything she had accomplished. Even those who had judged her began greeting her with respect whenever they met in town. One afternoon, Samuel received unexpected news that a wealthy businessman from the city had arrived looking for Clara. The stranger explained that many years earlier, Clara's late grandfather had secretly left her a valuable inheritance, and after a long search, they had finally found her. The businessman offered her a comfortable house, fine clothes, and enough money to live without ever working again. Everyone expected Clara to accept immediately. Instead, she looked toward the ranch where Lily was playing with the horses and where Samuel was repairing the old barn. She smiled gently and said, "Money can buy a house, but it cannot replace the family I found here." The businessman respected her decision and quietly wished her happiness before leaving. That evening, Samuel stood beside the wooden fence as the sunset painted the prairie golden. He turned to Clara with sincere eyes. "When you arrived, I thought I was giving a stranger a place to stay," he said softly. Now I realize you gave this family a reason to smile again. I don't want you to stay because of a promise made through letters. I want you to stay because I love you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Before she could answer, little Lily ran between them, holding both of their hands together. "Does this mean you're really staying forever?" she asked, with hope shining in her eyes. Clara knelt down, hugged the little girl tightly, and whispered, "Yes, my sweet girl. If you'll have me, I'll always be your mama." Lily laughed with pure joy and wrapped her arms around both of them. Samuel gently embraced them, feeling a peace he had not known since losing his first wife. A few weeks later, the small wooden church was filled with friends, ranchers, and neighbors who had once doubted Clara. They watched as Samuel and Clara exchanged heartfelt vows beneath simple wildflower decorations. No expensive jewels, no grand celebration, only honest love and grateful hearts. After the ceremony, the same people who had mocked her worn dress applauded the woman whose kindness had transformed an entire family. As the sun set beyond the endless western hills, Samuel, Clara, and Lily stood together on the porch of their ranch, watching the horses run freely across the golden fields. Clara realized that the greatest blessings often arrive after the hardest journeys, and Samuel understood that true beauty is never found in fine clothes, but in a compassionate heart. Lily smiled as she held both of their hands, knowing that love had finally brought her family back together. Thank you for watching Nordic Love Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for another unforgettable journey of love, hope, and second chances.